Good morning, everyone. This is Coca Sexton with Inside View. Thank you for joining today's webinar, part of Social Selling University. We have a lot of people joining. I think we had, about over 500 plus registrations. We had a couple hundred in the room, and more coming in. So thank everybody for joining us today. We have a great webinar. Today we have a guest speaker, Adam Metz. And the topic of the webinar is going to be titled Selling at the Point of Need. So let's do some introductions here. Adam Metz, VP of Business Development at The Social Concept. Adam, can you hear me?
Hey, good morning, Coca. Yeah, I'm Adam Metz. I run a company called The Social Concept, and last fall I published a book called The Social Customer, and a big chunk of it focused really heavily on social sales. And the reason why is because, out of all the use cases in social customer management, social sales is the one that we're seeing is bringing the most revenue to companies the fastest.
All right, good to have you, Adam.
Thank you.
For those of you that want to follow along and talk to us via Twitter, the hashtag is SocialTalk. So it's always good to find out who our community is in the Twitterverse. So feel free to use that hashtag during the session. So Adam, let's talk about your book. We have, when did this book come out?
Yeah, so the book came out back in September of last year, and yeah, it's been read by a lot of people. I think it hit #1 on the Amazon Internet Marketing charts, and actually came all the way up to #2 on just the marketing charts in general.
How many books? And how?
Off the top of my head, I would say probably it's somewhere in the 3,000 to 5,000 range.
That's impressive. That's impressive, and you got some good names in there. You got Jeff Gitomer here and Annika Seeley, and I'm reading the book now, probably about halfway through it. It's a good concept.
Yeah, it's as far as like colleges using it in MBA programs. I think San Jose State's just recently started making it a textbook. University of Washington's using it. It's really for anytime there's a course where they're teaching either sales professionals how to leverage social, or really like high-level executives, how do we literally drive money from social in a very short period of time. This is kind of the book they're trying to do.
Very nice, very nice. So let's get into the content. Let's talk about the journey.
Yeah, so let's address where we kind of want to take everybody on today's webinar. This is, it's a brief journey, but it's one that has a really, really clear endpoint. And I think just about everybody on today's call has 2 or 3 things in common. And I looked over the attendee list earlier, and I noticed that most of us were either mid-senior sales or marketing pros. And it seems like almost everybody on the call has some social media experience, so this is definitely not a call for newbies. But the one thing that I've noticed that from seeing a lot of survey data of people on this call is that no one can quite tell whether social is literally driving their income. At the end of the month when you read your commission statement, that you can empirically say that. So let's take a look at the destination where we're trying to go to. And so where we want to get you to at the end of this call and in the next few days in your work life is that you can really say these 2 things. That you can say, hey, I'm doing better to anticipate my customers' needs, my leads' needs, and that you're able to do more in less time, and to feel that at work your time is being used for selling and not busy work, and that you're doing extremely smart and automated prospecting that's putting you on the phone line or face-to-face with your client at their point of need, rather than sitting there Googling stuff when you should be selling.
Yeah, it's interesting because recent studies have shown that I think it's like upwards of 10 hours a week are spent by salespeople doing research, and the advanced salespeople, the ones many that join these webinars, are finding that leveraging social media and applications are what it's really cutting down that research time. Is that kind of what you agree with, Adam?
Yeah, it's funny. My dad's starting his first solo operation right now, and he's handling his own sales and marketing. And I sat him down with a sales enablement solution, I think maybe 4 months ago, 5 months ago, and he looked at this and he goes, man, if we had this stuff back in 1982 or in 1992, I can only imagine that sales guys would have just doubled or tripled their quotas and not spent so much time just like. I remember my very first job when I was in sales. This was 1999. They used to make us come in every 4th Saturday morning from 9 to 1 with just the sole idea of using Yahoo to look for leads. I mean, that's kind of ludicrous now because, social sales enablement solutions exist like this. But, yeah, just only 10 years ago, that was reality.
Well, I actually think that even with applications out there that do this, there are still many salespeople that are doing just that, going into Yahoo or going into 15 different browser tabs and doing a bunch of research.
Yeah, and I guess today the idea is that, let's all figure out together how we can spend more time selling so that way we can all spend more time hanging out with our families or on the golf course or doing stuff that's fun too. Not that selling isn't, because I love it.
Let's move along.
Yeah, so these are kind of the big three things that I'm seeing that non-social sales and marketing pros are facing. So if you go to the next slide, there's three big don't knows. So let's walk through them. And I think maybe not everyone on the call will identify with all three, but I think you'll probably see 2 out of 3 and say, ooh, that's me. So next one here. Okay, so we have 3 big don't knows. And if you look at the guy down there in the bottom of the slide, he's like, ooh, yeah, this is bad. So the first thing is a lot of people don't know the difference between the red zone, the dead zone, and the maintain zone. So right off the bat, it's a concept that's actually from a pretty well-known sales book called Proactive Selling. We'll get into that in a second. And then the second big don't know is you're not quite sure how to use social to make what a lot of sales managers call POCs, proactive outbound phone calls. And then the last one is you're a little bit unsure of how to find a valid reason to call a customer or a decision maker, especially if you didn't have one 10 minutes ago and your sales manager said, hey, look, buddy, you gotta make a call and figure out where this deal is at, or you gotta push this deal forward. So that's what we're trying to figure out. So let's take a look at the difference between the red zone, the dead zone, and the maintain zone. This is a real important concept. Okay, so this is really neat. This thing, it's called a 3D sales tracker, and I really think this may actually be the most important slide in the entire presentation or the whole webinar this morning. And it's not exactly about social selling, but it can absolutely be used in social selling. This thing could have been used 100 years ago in plain old regular selling. And some might say this is the cheapest, easiest CRM you could ever use. And it's called a 3D sales tracker. And the reason it's called that is because it examines all of your accounts from 2 angles. So on the left-hand side here, you'll see the close time. You'll see, okay, is this deal going to go in the next couple of weeks, in the next, month or so, or in the next kind of longer forecast going out, maybe 6 months. And then I put some sample dollar ranges up here, and you may want to change these dollar ranges based on your company. So for example, for this particular example company, an account that has the potential to do over 6 figures in a year is kind of a larger account. One that's in the 50 to 100 range is kind of medium, and then on the right is kind of small. So there's 3 sort of zones of selling. There's the red zone, which is the absolute hottest of the hot, the brand new accounts and the stuff that's going to be closing quickly. There's the maintain zone, which is the stuff that is, they're generally current customers or accounts that you're trying to grow, and the dead zone is the stuff with the least potential. And so if you've ever heard of Pareto's law or the 80-20 rule, they sometimes say that in sales, 20% of your effort yields 80% of your results. The problem is most salespeople are spending 80% of their time in the dead zone. And the dead zone is actually where you should only be spending about 5% of your time. And so then they spend the rest of their time in the maintain zone. And that's why their account base isn't growing. And so in reality, you should only be spending about 15% of your time in the maintain zone. It's a relatively low-risk place to be, because if you call a customer or a lead who's in the maintain zone, they'll generally pick up the phone and speak to you, or if you ask them to coffee or something, they'll generally meet with you. But it's a low-risk, low-reward proposition hanging out in the maintain zone. On the other hand, red zone, high risk. You might really encounter some resistance there, but this is where all your big accounts are going to be. And so the reason we're talking about the red zone in relationship to strategic selling and social selling is because I think that social selling and social sales enablement is the easiest and fastest way to get into the red zone. So that's why this is a really important slide here. So even if you walk away from this call and you're like, yeah, I'm not sure about using social sales, use this tool. It's a really good one. And we'll actually show you the book that it came from in a second here. So if you flip to the next slide, you'll see a copy of Proactive Selling. This, for me, is the best sales book I've read in the last 5 years. And I saw it yesterday on Amazon for $1.95. The last time I checked, that's less than what a Bud Light costs. So I would say that you invest the $1.95 in yourself. And this book merges very well with social selling, even though it was written a couple of years ago. I think it's actually being reissued in a new version very shortly. Okay, so now let's talk about the big 5 reasons to pick up the call. And we've actually got like kind of a double slide for each of these. So I'm going to give you some coaching. Coca's going to give you some coaching here too. And so this is the part where we're going to actually teach you to sell at the point of need. So here's the 5 big reasons that you would want to call upon any prospect. So Quickie, you want to kind of take this one? This is a really, really neat one.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I mean, that's really good stuff. I mean, as a salesperson, when I would look into calling on a prospect, there's always a trigger event, and we hear a lot about trigger events. There's some great speakers out there that really focus on what a trigger event is and how, as a salesperson, being proactive, you know how to identify these things as early on as a sales cycle as possible. One of those trigger events is mergers and acquisitions. With a merger and acquisition, I mean, if you're in a business where you can find big opportunities when companies merge with others or they get acquired by bigger companies, you tend to make a lot of money because these are the companies who are spending money. Your customers could be affected, so maybe you're dealing with a prospect that everything's looking good, deal's moving along fine, and then all of a sudden they get gobbled up by a large corporation. That might put your opportunity at risk. So these are trigger events that you need to be aware of so that you can call on your prospect and say, hey, what's really going on here? Could it impact your opportunity? Chances are yes. I mean, even if that your prospect is the one that is gobbling up a smaller company, I mean, there's some times when that happens where the CFO in the company says, hey, all costs get shut down until this acquisition goes through, or we have completely absorbed this company. So it could impact your opportunity on either side. And I think that as a salesperson, you want to get fed this information. So if your prospect just got absorbed, what does that mean? Is there going to be leadership changes? Are they going to be able to move forward with other projects? Are they getting acquired for the technology? Are they still going to be operating as their own business for a while? I mean, these are all great questions that you need to call your prospect about. And unless you know that information, unless you have these trigger events being fed to you, I don't believe that you're able to really know until it's too late that something's already happened.
Yeah, this one I think is really the trickiest one of all. So out of all 5 kind of reasons to call, this is kind of the craziest one. And if you flip to the next slide, you'll see a kind of a cool screenshot of what this looks like in terms of the real block and tackle of it on a day-to-day basis. There's like a little chart, and you can see how the smart agents look on the next slide there. So that way you can prioritize and figure out which of your economic buyers you might want to call on the fastest. So when you're using a social sales enablement solution, you'll notice that there's sort of this little menu here on the left side of the screen of all the different kinds of smart agent results about the particular company that you're trying to sell to. And so as I scan down this, I see the new product offerings, the leadership changes, but the one I'll usually go to first is actually going to be acquisitions. And you can even check which source it's coming from just to make sure it's something highly reputable. So, I wouldn't call about something at a little regional newspaper unless it's a regional company. However, if my prospect showed up in the New York Times at 6 a.m. this morning, I'd probably be getting on the phone. And, the one reason that I think this is the trickiest is because when you call about a merger acquisition question to one of your prospects, I think the odds are 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 that your prospect might have just gotten canned. So, every day, for example, and this is also how I stay on top of industry expertise, I don't just monitor the M&A of my own prospects. I monitor other companies in the industry. So, for example, I work in social. Every morning, every single morning, even to tell you the truth on the weekends, I monitor Facebook's acquisitions and the companies that merge with them. And the reason I do this is because I need to know every single company in this space. So let's say if you're selling into furniture companies, you're probably going to be monitoring the mergers and acquisitions of every furniture company. And so, yeah, it's completely possible you'd have a proactive reason to call your client because one of their competitors or maybe one of their partners goes through a merger. Does it make sense to monitor your clients' prospects, partners, and competitors? It actually does. And if you have a good social sales enablement solution, it only takes a few minutes to set it up. So it's like, why not do it? It's not that much extra work.
So let's talk about leadership changes. Another one of the 5 reasons, to call on your prospect is a leadership change. Deals rely on executive sponsorship. I mean, regardless of where you are in a sales cycle, you need to have the right decision makers. You need to have, executive sponsorship because somebody needs to sign the check, right? So if you're running these sales opportunities correctly, regardless of the methodology, I believe all methodologies have something in regards to executive sponsorship. So if there's a leadership change, you need to know this, and you need to set yourself up in a way that gets this information on a regular basis. Because when those sponsors leave, what's going to happen to your opportunity? As soon as a VP or a director or whoever your decision maker is, the person that's the executive sponsor exits a company, you need to understand who's the next in charge, who's going to be able to make this decision. In many cases, we don't find out about a leadership change for weeks or months afterwards. So what we're doing now is we're getting to a point where we can call in and say, hey, just saw that this VP is gone. Who should I work with in regard, who's the next in line that is going to continue this project? This is going to be important stuff for any sales cycle.
Yeah, I've really been thinking about this issue kind of all weekend. I remember we were sitting around on Mother's Day, and someone I think got a little alert on their iPad saying that the CEO of Yahoo had left the company due to the issues with his resume and stuff. And so what this really made me think, the second I heard it, I was sort of put on my sales manager hat, and I was like, man, if I was a salesperson and I had a deal on the table with Yahoo, the very first thing I would have thought is, oh man, first thing Monday morning, I want to call in and find out, how does this affect everything? How does this affect the deal? I mean, if you look at all of these little blips on the left-hand side here in the smart agents, I'm just thinking as a sales professional, how does this impact my deal and how does this impact my prospect in general? And this is something that you can easily monitor in a social sales solution. You don't need to be psychic. This kind of thing can be delivered to you every morning, so you can just glance at it for a second on your way to the train station or while you're waiting for your bus to go to work. It's not something that's really, it shouldn't be super time consuming, but it should make you the most up-to-the-minute sales professional on your team. Because, in the social age, information is sales currency. Deals are won and lost because of it. So you have to have it. Okay, cool. Let's look at another really interesting use case. And this one is actually more, some people may think this is a marketing use case. It's about a sudden spike or a sudden drop in web traffic. And this is kind of funky. So I ran into someone at a conference the other day from Taleo. And so as soon as I got back to the office, I was like, well, this person works in the marketing organization. I should probably know how well their marketing is doing. So if you're selling, especially into a marketing organization, this is a big one to know about. And so there's two key proactive questions to ask here. The first one is if you see a spike or a drop. You could say something like, hey, Mr. Prospect or Ms. Prospect, I've noticed that your web traffic is totally spiked. That's awesome. Or, hey, I've noticed that it's totally dropped. Sorry to hear that. How has that affected demand for your product or services? And in turn, how is that affecting your company's budgeting? You might find some really interesting answers there, especially regarding to downturns. And so then the second one, and again, this is really helpful if you're selling into sales and marketing organizations, is to say, hey, your company's clearly doing something really different lately. That's why I called. I was monitoring your web traffic this morning. Is there anything I need to be aware of in addressing your account a little bit differently? Because that might also yield a big answer there. And I think, Quickie, you had a few insights on the whole ups and downs of traffic flow too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I had never actually thought of it that way. Most of you know I come from a sales background, and when I usually look at our Buzz tab, I'm looking at the Twitter feed and some other stuff. So understanding the blog mentions, understanding the Twitter feed, but this unique visitor thing, even as a salesperson, I was trying to figure out how would I use this. But you bring up a really good point. Understanding the traffic that's going to your company, your prospect site, and if you're targeting a marketing professional, that would be excellent information. Maybe that spike, there's something happened within that company. So you're then able to understand, hey, there was a huge uplift in visitors to this URL, so maybe something happened, and allows you to dig in a little bit deeper. I think that's a great way of looking at this this screenshot. So let's move along. Let's talk about partnerships. The other reason why I think that you might want to call your prospect, maybe they're engaged in some type of partnership. Who are your customers working with? I believe that when you're on the tails of a hot prospect and you realize that they've got partnerships with other companies happening on a regular basis, what you're able to do is then start tying in connections with all these other partners. You might have a really weak connection in your prospect, but then you see a press release that they're partnering with Microsoft, for example. If you work really closely with Microsoft, now you have even more inroads. So understanding the partnerships that your prospects and your customers are getting involved in is extremely valuable. there's growth opportunities for new business when you realize, hey, if company A is now partnering with company B, I would think that there's a good chance that maybe there's something you can do if they're both of your prospects on ways that you can find, more opportunities. What do you have to say about that, Adam?
As far as the whole partnerships thing goes, it's especially good if you know the industry very, very deeply. So yeah, I mean, I've made a ton of proactive calls off this, especially to software companies that I work with, and also to be monitoring things on behalf of your customers. So yesterday I noticed one of the email marketing vendors released a product that I actually didn't think was all that great. I let a bunch of my existing customers know to kind of pat them on the back and say, hey, it looks like you guys are really a market leader. What it does for you as a sales professional is it just builds expertise, and it makes your clients know that not only are you looking out for their interests, but you're monitoring everybody else in the space. So sometimes it can be done even if it's not necessarily to build new business, just to build your thought leadership as a sales professional. Because when it comes down to it, if you don't want to be forced to differentiate on price, sometimes the deal will come down to you might have the same price as the next person, but the customer says to themselves, well, I trust Coca more, or I trust Adam more, because they simply know more about our industry. And that's sometimes what this whole partnerships thing can do for you.
Very nice. Let's talk about one of the final reasons. Let's talk about new offerings. I think that most companies, regardless of industry, this is something that as a salesperson you want to be aware of. You want to know when your prospects or your customers are offering a new product. Maybe they're launching a new line. Maybe they've revamped something they've already had. And the new offerings and understanding when that's happening is extremely beneficial. There was, we have a good story about a sales rep that obviously monitored this information on the prospects they were targeting, and they saw that this company had a new offering. They were releasing a brand new product. He sent an email to his decision maker saying, hey, congratulations, saw you had this new offering. Within minutes, the VP came out and said, how do you know all of this information? He's like, hey, I use a tool that feeds all this stuff in. And they became a reference account just because of the way that this salesperson used a tool like InsideView. I mean, there's a huge benefit in knowing the new offerings, and the sales rep won the deal because what he was able to do was every time these companies started coming out with new offerings, he realized, hey, that's a hot button, because within a company, when you're about to launch a new product, it's a sign of growth. And when you're about to launch this new product, it's usually an entire company that's behind it. So when you're aware of that and you're helping create the buzz and you are explaining, the benefits of this new product and on behalf of your prospect, it's a huge value add to these companies, and they appreciate it, and it makes them feel like, as a salesperson, you are in tune with their business. And people buy from people, and when you're in tune with what's happening within the organization, they feel comfortable with that, they're going to start trusting you more.
Yeah, there's this other thing that sometimes comes up with new offerings, and I found this about 50% of the time. Generally speaking, when a company's rolling out a new product, there's usually one or two new decision makers that are coming aboard at the same time, because generally if a company is doing a product they've never done before, they will generally hire at least a little bit of outside talent to augment their team. I had an example a few years ago. There was a Colorado-based hospitality company that brought in a new, I think it was a new product guy to add a new line to their hotel chain. And I saw there was a little thing in my social sales enablement software under new offerings, and it was like, so-and-so joins this team. And I was like, oh, this is great. And it was in some very obscure, Colorado hospitality magazine. It was like literally came out that morning. I emailed the guy because his email address was in that press release, and he writes back to me. He says, Adam, this is the first email I've received in my new email account. How the heck did you figure this out? And I was like, oh, I was just reading the Colorado Hospitality News. How's it going? And that person is actually still attends our webinars 3 years later. So it's proof that once you get in touch with someone from this, it really does work. And the other thing is, if your client is about to release something new, what you're also going to want to do is to know, how is this going to impact any deals in the pipeline as well, just because they may be putting some very serious R&D cycles or operation cycles into this new offering that they're putting out. This could mean your project gets put on hold. Hey, if something's going to get on hold, at least you want to be able to go to your sales manager and tell them, here's what's going on, rather than being reactive about it. All right, I think we have just a couple more. See, these are some of the funky ones here. And the other thing you can, this is really interesting here, this tweet chart here. This is, I guess it looks like this company HubSpot, issued a new offering today. So this also is something to be reaching out to your other clients to if you see anything. This can be a competitive thing, so if you have competitors in the pipeline, because I know that a lot of the sales professionals on this call will sell to many competitors in the same market, it's just to say, hey, you may have heard about this, heads up, it looks like your competitors just released this new product.
Let's talk about another reason, cost cutting. I mean, I hope we're out of the weeds yet in regards to the economy. But I mean, we still hear of companies going under or having bad years fiscally. So they're going to start cutting costs. If your customer's having layoffs, could that impact the opportunity you have with them? Absolutely. Maybe your contact is getting laid off. But even regardless if your contact is still going to stay within that company, if the company is having layoffs, chances are it's a pretty good indication that they're having financial problems. And if they're having financial problems, what are the chances of them spending money on new products or services? So I would say, yeah, layoffs is a good indicator that there's a problem with that account, right? If they're closing facilities, if part of their cost cutting is closing facilities, that means lots of people are going to lose their jobs. It means that, there's a really good chance that the project you're working on, even if it doesn't have to do with that facility, is going to either get stalled or completely dropped because your prospect isn't going to, they're having problems. And the problem as a salesperson is, we don't really know this information until we call back into the prospect and they tell us weeks later, hey, you know what, we're having some layoffs. I mean, you have to have a way to get this information fed to you, but then you call on your customer. So when you find out that, hey, something got released, either in a blog post or a news release or something was mentioned in some social network that this company is having layoffs or closing facilities, that's probably a good indicator that you need to call your prospect and say, hey, what's going on? Maybe there's a way you can help out. Maybe it's, just understanding where your deal is. But, these are good indicators as to what's happening within your prospects. How do you use cost cutting, Adam, within, your world?
Yeah, this is the one that, unfortunately, I do look to this one probably second right after mergers and acquisitions when I'm kind of scanning down my results. Luckily, I've noticed that it doesn't come up nearly as much as the others, at least lately, so maybe that's a sign that things are getting a little bit better in the economy. I'm not seeing this as much as I was, say, 3 or 4 years ago when I'm scanning through my social sales enablement solution. But yeah, it's kind of the same reasons. So I think there's another one that we had a cool reason around figuring out some sort of custom things that are even beyond these 5 basic reasons. One of the ways that we figure out very specific and kind of weird reasons to call the customer is by mining what are called custom agents. These are almost like little detectives that go looking for you every morning, really all day long. And some people take a look at this and they're like, well, why don't I just use Google Alerts? Well, you could use Google Alerts, but the problem is you're not going to get all of the right publications, and you're going to get a very diverse array of data rather than really targeted stuff. And so I think about a year ago, I wanted to learn a lot more about information products very quickly. So what I did was I set up a custom agent just for that. I tracked it every day for about 6 months, then I turned it off once I learned enough. So if let's say you get assigned to a new bunch of accounts, you need to learn ton about some industry that you maybe don't know that much about, that's a great time to use custom agents so you can quickly learn everyone in the space and then turn it off when you don't need it anymore. It's also really good for scanning foreign countries or foreign language key phrases. So if, let's say you have a big client in Mexico, you want to learn something about one of their new products and track anyone who has anything to do with that product, this is definitely a cool way to do it.
Yeah, another way that I use custom agents, you can set these up for many business reasons. Obviously, if there are specific types of trigger events that you're looking for that are mentioned in news articles outside of, cost cutting, leadership changes, the typical business-related ones. I mean, you can actually have some fun. I mean, one of my first experiences using Inside View was setting up a couple watch lists just out of fun because I was trying to figure out how to use the application. So I started a custom watch list around the word zombies and a custom watch list around Star Wars. I'm a big Star Wars fan. And it was amazing to me that after a few days, I started getting these alerts coming to me saying, hey, this company was also mentioned in a news article around zombies. That was a reason for me to call my prospect. I called in and said, hey, just calling in and saw some other stuff happening with your company. By the way, let me send you this email really quick. I found this article that talked about how, your company was mentioned along the same lines. It was mentioned along with zombies. And, it was a good chuckle. I mean, it wasn't a typical sales call, but that's what helps you stand apart from all the other salespeople that are always just calling either, hey, I'm just calling to check in, or hey, what's the status of this deal? I mean, you start finding better reasons just to call your prospect, just build the rapport. So let's go into the 3 steps. Let's try and we try and close these things out with some immediate takeaways. The 3 steps to social sales. I mean, Adam, you want to go through these, or you want me to go through them?
Sure. Yeah, this is actually pretty simple. This is how you can get your team. It's Wednesday right now. This is how you get your team social selling by Friday afternoon. These are pretty quick and easy to implement. So the first thing is, you need a little piece of software. You need a basic social sales enablement solution, and we're going to give you one that doesn't cost anything in about 5 minutes. So sit tight. You don't need to bust out your wallet or anything. The second thing is do a pizza laptop lunch. The reason I would say do this as a group as opposed to doing it individually, what you're going to want to do is get your whole sales team together and not just flag all your current reference accounts. That's really easy. You actually want to walk people through their entire sales career. So going back to their very first sales job, because this is where previous jobs really come into play, and some of the most valuable people at a time like this are actually folks who came to your industry from other industries and have had sales accounts outside of your industry. The reason for this is because you're going to want to enlarge your sales team's social network. And you do this by pivoting off of past reference accounts. So I usually pull aside maybe 2 hours for this sort of lunch, and maybe do it on Friday afternoon. Should be a lot of fun. But the key is to really pull out all those accounts that are sort of in everybody's history book, so that you can start pivoting off them to make sales. And then every morning, of course, you're going to get this little social sales email. You don't need to wake up at 5 a.m. to get it, but I would definitely make it one of the first things you read every morning. It should only take about a minute or so to scan, but there's going to be maybe 10 or 20 actionable items in that email almost every single day. And yeah, it arrives on the weekends. You don't need to necessarily read it on the weekends, but be sure you scan those too before you head to work Monday morning, because that's going to have some stuff that you can pick up the phone or go meet with the prospect and really do some business with. So as far as, if you've never used a social sales enablement solution, this is probably where I'd get started. It doesn't cost anything. You don't need like a credit card to sign up or anything like that. And this will teach you how to use it within really just a few minutes. So I would give it a shot. I've been using this solution Inside View for I think 5 years now, and I probably use it 10 or 20 times a day. But I've had clients of mine, in the consulting world that have only used this version of it and have gotten plenty of actionable insights. And I think the biggest thing that you'll learn just right off the bat is, who do I need to talk to, and are my customers growing or shrinking, and where should I be putting my sales effort, and how can I stay in the red zone? So as far as breaking down how to have that, Quickie sales meeting with your team, so this is actually how I set up sales enablement solutions for entire executive teams. So I'm going to meet with a client in Arizona actually later this week. And so what I would do is get the entire sales team in the same room. Ideally, they should probably all be using the same social sales enablement solution. And I'd probably have a prize, like maybe a bottle of wine or something cool, to the team member who is the most reference accounts. And this is probably one of the most accomplished salespeople on your team, or perhaps maybe even the oldest. And so once you load up all these reference accounts into your system, though, you'll see an enormous uptick in reasons to call, because you'll be monitoring these reference accounts so much more often, and you'll be able to get introductions to prospects maybe a little bit hard to reach from your old customers. So that's going to just give you so much more access to new prospects. And let me show you actually what this looks like once it's all up and running. So if you look on the next slide here, you'll see these are my reference accounts. These are some companies I've worked with over the last 5 or 6 years. Actually, some of these go back as far as a decade. And it only takes a second to add these reference accounts. You just kind of pop them in. You could type them in almost like you're doing a Word document. And someone may say, what's the point of having all this data in a social sales solution? Well, let me ask you this. What's the difference between having 120 LinkedIn connections and 240 LinkedIn connections? Well, it's a difference of second-degree connectivity of 14,400 people. So when someone asks you, is it worth taking a lunch hour to perhaps get as many as 140,000 secondary connections? Like, yeah, I'd be willing to sit in a conference room every hour of every day for a week to get that kind of juice. So this is something that's really going to amp up your ability to reach net new prospects, which is exactly what you want to do if you want to sell into the red zone. That's the most profitable sales you can do. So right before we get into Q&A, one thing I've always learned is I used to be a high school teacher about 10 years ago, is sometimes when you're doing a presentation, even a sales presentation, it's really helpful to give people some Q&A starters. Not saying, hey, these are the questions you got to ask, but these are a few questions that may be helpful. So I've noticed a lot of sales teams saying, our VP won't let us do this. How can we overcome that hurdle? Or, hey, our sales team has a problem with so-and-so. How can we turn this problem around quickly? And especially a lot of questions of what do you do if you're a smaller company or what do you do if you're a larger company? So, this is also when you're selling, this is a really good way to address what a lot of sales professionals call damaging admissions about the shortcomings of your product, so you can proactively put out some questions about them to plant the seeds of objection in the prospect's mind first. So hit us with what you've got about social sales enablement.
Well, to ask some of these questions, I mean, for everybody that's on the webinar, go ahead and type your questions into the questions box. But Adam, answer that question for me. Number 2 here, our VP of sales doesn't allow us to whatever it is. I hear this a lot. I'm sure that a lot of people on the call probably hear this also. So how do they go about it? What would your recommendation be for companies that they want to be more active in these social networks, but their VP of sales isn't really convinced yet?
Yeah, so this is a really tricky one. So the 2 things that I hear a lot, and I seriously hear this like on a week-to-week basis, is our VP of sales won't buy us a CRM, he won't buy us Salesforce, or he won't buy us Sugar, whatever customer relationship management system they want. That one I'm hearing less and less these days, just as CRM is fairly mainstream. It's been around for 30 years. But yeah, like the whole idea of our VP of sales won't let the sales team make a Facebook page, or he won't let us get on Twitter as a sales team. So here's what I would do. On a Saturday morning at home, make yourself a cup of coffee and make personal accounts on these social networks, but use them in a totally professional manner. And basically, do some research. Maybe it'll have to be after hours. Use a social sales enablement solution to track down where your customers and prospects are on the social web and basically start monitoring them. And what you'll be able to do is over time, you'll be able to substantiate to your sales manager, hey, I'm driving deals from this thing from either watching my customers' conversations on Twitter or seeing them on LinkedIn. Once you can start to substantiate 1 or 2 or 3 deals, I think your sales manager is going to agree, hey, there's some there. There's some real substance to using a social sales solution, but you might have to do a little extra homework on your end to substantiate that.
Outstanding. One of the questions that gets asked a lot, and our super fan Brett Olson, who attends most of these webinars, has asked this, is, how much time do you spend? I mean, I know I have my own opinion, but it's great to see have somebody like you in here that can also explain this to us. As a sales rep, as an individual bag holder for sales, what would you suggest they should be spending as amount of time any given week within these social networks?
Wow, in terms of sheer minutes per day, you mean? That's a really good question. So here's how I would do it, and it's actually pretty simple. So first thing in the morning, I would grab that Quickie email. So I'd spend about 2 minutes scanning that email. Maybe actually on your way out the door, if you drive to the office or something like that, maybe even print it out and just take it with you. If you're taking the train, you could kind of circle things on it. The reason that I think is the most important thing to do is because it's scanning across multiple networks for your key prospects. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, spend a minute or 2 putting out a piece of content or 2. Could be, sharing a very high-value article or something like that. One way I do it really passively is I read on my iPad on the way to work. I read Zeit. It's CNN made it. It's like an iPad app, but I've connected it to my LinkedIn profile and my Twitter profile. So I figure if I'm reading the newspaper every morning anyway for 15 minutes, why not pick the 2 or 3 really brilliant articles that would appeal to my prospects and customers, share them from my iPad, from the bus or from the train, and then they'll see them with a little comment or 2. So I'd say as long as you can monitor that email from your social sales enablement solution and then share a couple of pieces of content with a relevant group of people, you have done enough. So I do think this is something that can be done in 10 or 15 minutes a day tops.
Great answer. Another question by David is, what are the top 2 to 3 metrics you would use to measure your success? In fact, I'm almost at that section in your book where you're starting to explain this, but educate us. Tell us what are the metrics that you think that an individual rep and then up to a management level, like what metrics should be, because that's all about measurement. So what should we be measuring?
Absolutely. So yeah, so when I'm measuring success in the sales cycle, I tend to use the Marketo revenue cycle as my guide for what I'm picking. So if you Google Marketo revenue cycle, and we can put a picture of this graphic in the Twitter stream, this is pretty much how you gauge what your success metrics are going to be. And it's funny that you asked this question. I'm in the middle of writing my third book right now. It's going to be called Seed Nurturing. And what it's all about is taking these anonymous social leads that we call seeds. They're like little seeds that are in the ground, and turning them into what are called knowns, meaning I know that customer's name or I know that prospect's name. And so the first metric is going to be leads that are known leads. And then the second metric is going to be what they call MQLs, or market qualified leads. Then the next metric is going to be SQL, sales qualified leads. And then the last metrics are going to be opportunities, and then finally closed deals. So obviously closed deals are a way more important metric than, say, market qualified leads, but you do need to be tracking all of this stuff. So if you need a picture of what this all looks like together, I would just Google Marketo revenue cycle. It's a pretty impressive graphic, and I think it's a great way to think of all the revenue that comes into your company. It's also a very pretty picture. Looks like a little rainbow kind of. Good question.
So if you were to say the two, just as bullet points, what would those two be?
Yeah, if I had to pick two out of the whole revenue cycle from social, I would say that it would have to be opportunities created and closed deals. Those, if two out of that seven, that would be the most important. But if I could have seven, I'd take all of them.
True. So one of the other questions that came up prior is on the screen now. None of my decision makers use social media. So I mean, I don't believe that with the amount of how much we're all connected these days, that most of none of your decision makers are on social networks. I mean, if you're in this world, in the sales environment, in a proactive type of industry, chances are you have a LinkedIn profile. So you just need to. Chances are you just don't even know where your customers are. These decision makers are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been reading so much about the Facebook IPO this week, and the statistic that came out yesterday, I think in CNN Money, said that 15% of the globe's population is on Facebook. And so then I sort of extrapolated that to figure out, okay, well, if you walk into, say, a bar in Paris and you ask people, how many of you use social media? Even for the general population in, developing nations, first world nations, you're getting to, 80, 90% in some nations now, as far as, how many people, let alone decision makers, are using social. I'd say the general rule of thumb that you can use if you're selling business to business is that 73 to 80% of your decision makers are on social media. And that data is actually pretty old. That data is from Forrester's B2B Hero Survey from 2009. So if your sales manager comes to you and says, hey, they're not on social, you can generally show them that Forrester data and say, I think you might be inaccurate.
I'm sure, being a consultant, you talk to many different companies all over the place, and I would just think that you come across companies that just don't have the mindset of being hunters. I mean, maybe they're in bigger industries that have become, lack of a better term, fat and happy about just having a bunch of stuff coming into them, and business is slowing down. So now the sales reps are being required to go out and actually hunt new business. How do you change that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, that's a little more of an organizational psychology question. The book I've been reading lately, one of my clients, Hal, he really turned me on to this book called Built to Last that was written by Jim Collins in the 90s, and it's aged really well, actually. And, I think every, organization that's really doing something incredibly right usually has these big, hairy, audacious goals. They call them BHAGs. And, sales teams and sales managers typically do the same thing. They'll have, it's sort of a grow or die mentality I've found in the best sales teams. They're constantly trying to evolve the skill set of their sales reps and of their sales managers. And I think using social sales enablement is a way to grow very painlessly. So it's a very low risk. It's not an expensive thing to do. It's not very time consuming. And that's why I think a lot of companies that look at solutions like, Inside View or, any kind of social sales enablement, they scratch their head after they see the presentation and they're like, wow, that was kind of a no-brainer. This is pretty easy. And so that's why it's kind of a big competitive advantage right now. And it's like, for a minimal amount of money and a minimal amount of time, why would you not want to make your sales team smarter and faster so that they can hunt kind of passively, I guess, hunt without having to smile and dial, or hunt without having to make 20 cold proactive outbound phone calls. It's so much easier to hunt today than it was back, when I started my first sales job in 1999. So it's, man, I wish we had this technology back then. Maybe I'd still be at that same job.
Excellent question. In fact, that one came from Kelly. So thanks, Kelly, for asking that question in the chat. One of the other questions that's come up, from Leslie is, and I see this a little bit in my role, and I'm sure Adam runs into this as well, is, from the marketing side. I mean, marketing professionals have always, well, not always, let's say more recently than most other departments, understood the impact that social can have on a business. And, salespeople, we just do what we need to do. And, we get into a rhythm. We have a great opinion of what works and what doesn't work. We're type A personalities, which is why we're usually in sales. And, you must talk to marketing departments that are really fired up about leveraging trigger events and leveraging connections and how all these things play within, lead flow and opportunity creation. How do you get your sales teams to be, excited about this as well?
Yeah, you definitely see a personality difference between the sales teams and the marketing teams. And the one kind of myth that I'd like to shatter about the type A personality in sales, I've actually been doing a lot of reading lately about the type B personality in sales, and I've found that some of the most successful salespeople using, let's say, the proactive selling method actually can be type B personality. So it's not to say that, whereas, yeah, I agree, there's definitely, in the sales profession, it's probably 90% type A personalities, but of the 10% or so that are type B personalities, they can do especially well. Sometimes the quiet salesperson is actually the best fit for the for the client, or the more introverted sales professional. So yeah, getting back to how do you motivate the sales team to focus on these trigger events, because that is huge. Because as a marketer, you're like, ooh, you guys blew an opportunity. Da, 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 da. Here's how I do it. Take the trigger event, forward it to them in an email, put the prospect's name in all caps, and if you can, put the prospect's actual personal name, not just the company. Salespeople, generally speaking, are compulsive email checkers. So you have to kind of play to their weakness, and if they see an email with a hot prospect in the subject line, they are going to open the darn thing. Now, if they don't call at that point, then that's when I'd start taking it up with their sales manager. But I would just at least start peppering them with these immediate trigger alerts that says John Smith, or what have you in the subject line. But I'm thinking they're going to open it. And if you really want to check, this is a little devious, but you could turn on the read receipt function in your corporate email to figure that out. But that's a little mean.
Good tips. Good tips. We might actually try some of that. When I talk to some of our other customers, I mean that comes up a lot. Is how do you get your sales teams motivated for this kind of stuff? And I think that, feeding it to them is probably a great way of going about it. So if there's no other questions, let's talk a little bit about your book. And I don't want to make, obviously it's a plug, but at the end of the day, I'm reading it, and, as a salesperson, I can find uses in this. Let's talk a little bit about how companies are, how a sales team should centralize their social presence. I'm actually at the chapter in the book where you're talking about the spoke and hub model and things along those lines. As a sales team, as a sales manager, I saw the attendee list. We've got a lot of directors and above attending the webinar. If they wanted to implement something in regards to a social selling practice within their sales teams, I think the book has some good ideas around this. It really still talks to the marketing side, but I believe it's still relevant to a sales manager. So explain these different, ways that you can manage these social notes.
Sure. Yeah, so here's how I would do it if I were a sales manager on this call. Yeah, so I would read actually the entire book if I were a sales manager, but then I would just take the one chapter on social sales, which is pretty darn short, and just Xerox that for your sales team. Give that to the sales team. They could read it in 15 minutes, so it's a pretty quick read. And then for any of the members of the sales team who are kind of like, oh yeah, I want to learn more, there's this, if you look on the left-hand side of this slide, there's a 7-hour course on social selling and social business. You can actually download it for your iPod, so they can just listen to it on their way to work. It's completely free. Just go to the socialconcept.com. So as far as centralizing it, the big thing is, to set up your social sales enablement solution as a team solution. So that pizza party thing that I was talking about earlier, it's not a social event. I mean, of course, it's social and that everyone's in the same conference room together, but the real reason to do it is to make it so everyone on your sales team can leverage one another's reference account. So it's not just for each person to leverage their own reference accounts, but it's for me to be able to look at a prospect and then look at Kevin sitting in the desk next to me and say, oh, hey, Kevin, this prospect is connected to your reference account from last year. So if you don't set up sort of the relationship history of your sales team, you're not going to be able to leverage your social selling solution heavily or very well. And also, what you're looking for is multiple points of crossover on a reference account. So you always want to have 5 or 6 or 7 different ways to get into an account, because what you'll find is half the time someone left a job, somebody quit, someone doesn't have such a good relationship with someone anymore. So the more connections you have, the sort of the safer place you're in here. So that's kind of how I would address that from the sales manager perspective.
Very nice. So again, I'm only about halfway through the book. What other nuggets of greatness can you share with the audience in regards to, how to get this thing started? Like, what are the, the next steps?
Yeah. So yeah, you don't need to go out and hire a VP of social media. I think this is something that's usually functionally owned by a department, but there's basically 23 different ways to do social CRM or social customer relationship management. And when you walk into Baskin-Robbins to get an ice cream or something, you don't order all 39 flavors. You usually just get 1 or 2. And so it's the same thing with social customer relationship management. Inside the book, there's these 23 different use cases. What you're going to want to do is look at 1 or 2 of them and learn to truly kick some butt on just 1 or 2 of them. So maybe that one is going to be social sales enablement or social selling, or maybe your marketing team's using social marketing. But my recommendation here is only try and be an expert on 1 or 2 of them. Once you've conquered a couple of them, then great. That's cool. Go and add in your 3rd and your 4th use case. But if you try to do them all at once, what's going to happen is your resources will be spread too thin. Your team's going to be overwhelmed, and they'll feel like you're trying to ask them to do too many things. So before, say, using social sales to break into new accounts, maybe you should use it for studying trigger events on your current accounts so you don't kind of go bonkers. And, on the next slide, I saw you're pulling up actually some other really cool resources, which I figured out. If these are PDFs now, you can put them on your iPad too, which is really cool.
Absolutely. So, again, thanks to Adam for being a part of this webinar. But, this really comes down to what, my core belief is that salespeople want to know this information. It's no longer to be locked up in a marketing department on how to leverage social media. I mean, as a sales rep, I learned to do it on my own. And there's a wealth of knowledge out there. In fact, we have the Social Selling University, that has a faculty of these thought leaders, and we're putting on these webinars on a regular basis, and we're starting to create additional content. I mean, so outside of blog posts on ways to engage your customer, your prospect, or in the case of this webinar, how do we get to those social customers? We have some guides that are going to be made available. We already have the ultimate guide to social selling using LinkedIn. We have one for Twitter. We're going to have another one around Facebook coming out. So I really recommend that everybody join Social Selling University, so you can continue to get fed this information. We're going to be coming out with it on a regular basis. And it's great to have somebody like Adam as a part of the Social Selling University, because you are a thought leader in this space. And I think a lot of the stuff that you train companies on about how to be social business really can be filtered down to a sales team that can really make an impact on both revenue, lead generation, and customer retainment.
Cool. And then, when you're looking at this picture here, what you're seeing is, this is how these reference accounts are established. So when you see this little arrow on the left-hand side of the screen, this is the really important thing. So this is what you're hoping to get after you've set up everybody to say, oh, gee, how can we figure out how to get to Guy Kawasaki? Say, let's say that's the prospect. It's because maybe Wes, the guy who sits next to you, used to work at BitPass with Guy, or maybe because Paul down the hall used to work at Simply Hired with Guy. And so the other thing is, whenever one of my clients is like saying, oh, yeah, we use LinkedIn and we use Google Alerts, we're doing great, getting all our sales data, what I say to them is, well, would you like to know what's going on at your clients and your prospects' companies as it's happening, like literally in real time? And do you want to be tied to your prospects in a way that's 2 or 3 times more relevant than LinkedIn? Or maybe would you like to have the right phone number or the right social media info on your prospect 90% of the time within 3 seconds? That's a pretty big deal, and that's why a lot of people try this stuff out. So I would definitely encourage you to take the free version of Inside View for a test drive. I love it. I use it a lot. And actually, we have another little special thing. Besides the, we're giving away 50 copies of the book today and 50 Social Concept Silver subscriptions. We have something else kind of special to give you on the next slide. What we did was we set up a code, and you'll probably want to write this down. So this little code's worth 20 or 30 bucks. It's IV, like Inside View free, 0513. And what that is that's a code for our Social Concept Silver membership, and it's good for 2 months on the house. You can cancel it any time if you just want to take it for a test drive. It's fun. It comes with a free copy of my first book there, There's No Secret Sauce. And you can actually download another webinar that Inside View with Coca and I from last August as well. 8-hour training course on social media strategy, ton of cool stuff on social sales enablement. So enjoy if you'd like to check that out. And by the way, if you win a subscription today on the webinar, then we'll give you an extra 2 months free. So it'll be a 14-month subscription. So thanks for asking such great questions today. This was a really fun and interesting webinar.
Yeah, and thank you, Adam, for being a part of Social Selling University and coming in for this session. Going through all the questions and the feedback. And then going through the Twitter stream, it looks like there was some great content that everybody was able to latch onto. So again, thank you, everybody. We'll let you know when we're going to have our next webinar coming up, and you guys have a great and successful day. Bye now.